Bandwidth for today's show is brought to you by SoftLayer.com. We love SoftLayer here at Talkapolis. They are the greatest hosting company ever. They make everything easy. Check out their website at SoftLayer.com. Thanks again for sponsoring the show.
Coming up next on Political Soup with Crom Carmichael, we're going to talk about the late, great Margaret Thatcher and everything she meant to Great Britain and around this world. Also, let's take a good hard look at the Bill of Rights, like you've probably never seen it before. And of course, we're going to talk about the cheating scandal in the schools in Atlanta. Who's responsible? You're not going to believe this one. All that and more coming up next with Crom Carmichael on Political Soup.
All Cooper CPAs, located in the heart of East Nashville, offer a wide variety of tax services for individuals and businesses. Contact them at 615-257-0646 and visit their website, allcooper.com, for a full list of services.
Talkapolis, the social media TV network for your city.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome in to Political Soup. I'm Joe Williams with the man of the hour, every hour here, Crom Carmichael. We've got a lot to cover, and Crom, it's been kind of a tough week for a lot of folks in more ways than one, and we're going to talk a little bit about some passings, but I want to start with one that might surprise you, and that's Annette Funicello passed away this week. And I know for those of you who were Mouseketeers in the day, this is kind of an important thing.
It is. Annette Funicello is 6 years older than I am.
Then this is a huge deal to you.
Sure. So when I was 13 and 14, Annette Funicello was 19 and 20, and she was either a Mouseketeer or she was a movie star, and she was a very, very attractive girl to a 13 or 14-year-old. So she's one of those people that I have no memory of her not being alive. And so I've known, and so it's a long time.
I was going to say, can we say maybe first crush there?
Yeah, it could be.
From the looks
Never
in
know.
From the looks in that
Never
face?
know, yeah.
All right, now to the more serious passings. Unfortunately, Great Britain lost a great one, and Margaret Thatcher, former Prime Minister, who passed away earlier this week. And Crom, I think more so than maybe some of the other prime ministers, at least any since Winston Churchill, this is a passing that'll be felt around the world.
Oh yes, I mean Margaret Thatcher stood for certain things, and the people who opposed her hated her for the fact that she stood so strongly for things that she believed in. And Margaret Thatcher, more than anything else, was a moralist as opposed to a politician. And if she thought something was wrong, then she would speak up and she would fight what she thought was wrong, even when members of her own party didn't understand what she was doing and opposed her. Now, what's interesting is she became prime minister almost as a fluke, because there was somebody who was head of her party. Now, in Britain, the way that they elect prime ministers is they elect the parliament, the people popularly elect the parliament, and then the parliament picks the prime minister.
Kind of like picking Speaker of the House in this country.
Yes, very similar, and in the sense that if the Republicans win the House, we're pretty certain that they're going to pick Boehner as the speaker. Now, in the case of Great Britain, you know who's going to be the prime minister, but you don't get to vote directly for the prime minister. You vote for the parliament. Now, Margaret Thatcher, the conservatives, and I believe that they were called the Tories.
Okay.
Margaret Thatcher, there was a person who was going to run against the current prime minister, and that person backed out. Margaret Thatcher then went into that person's office and said, "I'm going to run against you." And that person apparently, without even looking up, said, "Well, you know you're going to lose."
Yeah.
Okay. and she won, but she didn't win the prime ministership. She just won the head of the party. Okay, so she was now head of the Tory party, which was the party out of power.
Okay.
Then the guy that was in charge of Britain did just a hash of things. It was a mess. They put in currency controls, so standards of living were falling, labor unions were everywhere, and in the great ascendancy to the demise of the country. And so she became the prime minister of Great Britain at its worst time, but it was so bad, it's a little bit like Rahm Emanuel saying, "Don't let a crisis go to waste."
Yeah.
Britain was in crisis, and so Margaret Thatcher then set about to, first of all, change some laws so that the police could, in fact, fight with the labor unions physically if necessary. And the two largest and most violent unions went on strike there were fights, literally fights.
Yeah.
People died, but she defeated those two unions, and in doing that, the rest of the unions more or less capitulated to her demands. And she then, along with Pope Paul, is it Pope Paul or Pope John Paul? Which one was the one? John Paul, yeah. and Reagan, they were there together for 8 years, and they changed the world at that time. Now, what they did has more or less kind of gone away.
Everything runs in a cycle.
It runs in cycles, but in Great Britain, the interesting thing between us and the British is that they elect their members of Parliament, which then pick a prime minister. We, on the other hand, vote for our House, our Senate, and we also vote popularly for president in the sense of the electoral college.
I was going to say the closest thing we can ascribe prime minister to is I call it a quasi-president, if you will, the real figurehead of the government, speaks for the government, speaks for the crown, if you will. Well, maybe not speaks for the crown, but is the representative of the government,
right,
and the people to the crown and to the world. The other thing I've always found interesting is that in Great Britain, we are so used to the Democrats and the Republicans. In Great Britain, you've got the Conservatives, you've got the Labor Party, but you've got 2 or 3 more that are active and sometimes players in making these coalition governments work.
Yes, except it's not as bad as, say, for example, Italy. In Italy, you do have like 5 parties.
Yes.
Now, 3 of them, and the reason there's 3 large parties in Italy now is the comedian, and I don't remember his name, but he now is running one of the parties that got like 20 to 25% of the vote.
Yeah.
And in Italy right now, they can't seem to form a government because they can't get a majority of the people who were elected to support one person to run the government, and so they're having to have new elections. In Great Britain, it still is more or less the Tories and the Labor Party.
Right.
And so it's while there are other parties, just as here in the U.S., you've got the Conservative Party, you've got the Libertarians, you've got the Natural Law Party, you've got the Green Party.
Yeah.
So you have these different parties, but at the end of the day, we're pretty much a 2-party system, and Great Britain is pretty much a 2-party system. But the way that they elect their leader, the absolute leader, is different.
Now, maybe one way to make things a little easier here, when you talk about the Tory party, of course, for those of us who grew up and realized that the Tories were bad people in the 1770s. This is more the Conservative Party, probably a group we would more current U.S. conservatives would more be like or relate to.
Yes, except the Tories, the problem that Britain has, and you could even argue that part of the problem the U.S. has is that you have in the case of Britain, you have a leftist party, and in the U.S. I would call the Democrat Party the leftist party.
Don't think they disagree.
And then the Republican Party in the U.S. is not that strong an alternative, and my evidence of that is that George Bush greatly expanded the government while the Republicans were also in control of the House and the Senate. And so to argue that the Republicans are, quote, conservative, that is true under Reagan. They were conservative. But under Bush, the government grew at a pretty darn rapid rate, and it actually shrunk more under Clinton and expanded under Bush. But that's because the Republicans that controlled the House and the Senate during Clinton's last 4 years were pretty darn conservative.
Okay, Ms. Thatcher's memory will have to forgive me for where I'm headed here. But given your thoughts on that, how then is if the Republicans are not that much of a difference to what the Democrat, how then are we so diametrically opposed at opposite poles as a country right now between the two?
Well, the diametrically opposed is a term that I'm going to push back on.
Okay.
I think that the left in this party, and we'll talk about this in the next segment when we talk about the Bill of Rights.
Okay.
The left in this party sees no bounds to how much property it can take from individuals.
Okay.
Both in the form of income and actually in terms of now
property.
Property. The president has said he wants to limit the value of IRAs and the value of 401ks. That's clearly an attack on property.
Yes.
People have earned it. They've saved it. Now Obama says, I want to attack your savings. And we'll talk about that from the standpoint of the Bill of Rights. The Republican Party, on the other hand, is diametrically opposed to that but that doesn't mean that they're diametrically, they want to go completely the other direction.
Okay.
They just simply are saying, I don't want to go that far left, and then the media says, well, if you don't want to go that far left, then you're way over there on the right. And that, I think, is part of the problem. Because if you look at President Bush expanded government spending pretty dramatically and expanded government programs.
So then, what I'm hearing then, your belief is that the linchpin of the right has been moved more to center instead of where it should be farthest right.
And I think that I think the next presidential election, I do believe that there will be somebody who is much, much more conservative than either Bush was or Romney. And frankly, also more conservative than McCain. And so the Republicans have not really had and even George Bush Sr., the first George Bush, wasn't conservative. If in my lifetime, we've had one conservative president, Ronald Reagan, only one. The rest of them, whether they're Republican or Democrat, the Democrats have been more left. The Republicans have been slightly left. And so when you have a slightly left or more left, guess which direction the country moves in over time?
Yeah, the boat turns that way.
It keeps going left. It lifts to the left.
Yeah.
So that's where we are. And Margaret Thatcher's passing is the passing of the last great lion.
I was going to say, you mentioned the relationship between Pope John Paul, Ronald Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher, and you're right. I mean, and if you even take the Pope out of it, make the Pope non-political, if you will, even though the Vatican is a country unto itself, but make it as unpolitical as possible. These two, you know, under the watch of Thatcher and Reagan, we literally saw the Cold War end, and the walls come down.
That's right, but you couldn't have. That would not have happened without the Pope and his moral hand on Poland.
Okay.
Because he was from Poland, and because that's where communism, in the sense of the Soviet Union, fell. And I have to say this: while I have no absolute proof of this, I believe that Gorbachev was partly persuaded by Reagan not to send the tanks into Poland, because Gorbachev did not send the tanks in, and the world owes him a great debt for not doing that. But I also think that Reagan played a hand in that, because that was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Empire, and Gorbachev had to know that. But it would have been
World War III again.
No,
no.
No,
you don't think that catastrophic?
No, it
would
have
have
been World War III, but you would have had tens of thousands of Polish people killed, just like you had it when the Soviets sent the tanks into Hungary. I guess it was 20 years before,
right,
in the 60s.
The difference being, you really think the rest of the world would have sat back and just let that happen again?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you really?
Yeah, we wouldn't have gone. Poland was not an ally. Poland was part of Eastern Europe, and it was part of the Soviet Empire, and it was a true empire.
Yeah.
And I think that Gorbachev said, I'm not going to go in and kill all those people. And I think that Reagan was part of that, of what persuaded him.
I think you're probably right. I'd love to have been sitting there. Wouldn't you love been sitting at that poker table?
Well, we'll never know.
Having already folded and just watched it go?
Unless Gorbachev says something, we'll never know.
And he won't.
But what was interesting was when Reagan died, and his casket was there in that church, and the world leaders could come up and stand there. Margaret Thatcher came up and stood there and looked at the casket draped by the American flag. Gorbachev came up right behind her. The very next person came up, stared at it, took 2 steps forward, laid his hands on the flag, and rubbed it. The only person to touch it, only person to touch the casket and the flag was Gorbachev. Fascinating.
Wow. You learn something new every day. I did not remember that, and I thought I remembered all of it. You know,
I think there was a
connection between those guys.
You bet.
You're only going to get this stuff here, folks. I got to tell you. All right, we're going to take a break. Our first break. When we come back, Crom is going to help us understand a little bit better the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution of the United States of America, and in a way, I think. All of us is, that's great. Well, you can tell. I did well in history. I did poorly in English. All of us will appreciate and learn from. Stay with us. We'll be back on Political Soup.
If you want to feel the wind blowing through your hair and see the great city of Nashville at the same time, check out Nashville Scooter Tours. Trekking through the downtown streets to Music Row with Nashville Scooter Tours is safe eco-friendly, and a whole lot of fun. They use Xenon electric scooters that go 55 miles on a single charge. Find out more by calling 615-290-5563 or book your reservation today at NashvilleScooterTours.com.
And welcome back, everybody. Segment 2 of Political Soup. Joe Williams along with Crom Carmichael. And Crom, we have talked extensively over the run of Political Soup about every week we come up with some argument about this right or that right, and basically what does the Constitution give us? What does the Bill of Rights give us? I think it's time for a little bit of a history lesson and a little more in depth. I think you've come up with a great way to explain a lot of this.
Well, the Constitution was passed, and after the Constitution was passed, a lot of the opponents, the anti-federalists, as it were, a lot of the opponents said, listen, the biggest problem we have with the Constitution is there is not a list of rights to protect individuals or to control the national government. And so Madison said, okay, so he wrote, it turns out, he wrote 17 amendments, and 17 of them passed the House, 12 of them passed the Senate. And then of those 12, 10 of them passed constitutional muster and became what we call the Bill of Rights. Now, the Bill of Rights were born from the notion that we needed to have rights to protect the individual. So let's look at the First Amendment, for example. It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Now, up until that point, do we agree that virtually everybody believes that freedom of religion and freedom of speech are individual rights?
Yes.
Okay, they're not collective. You don't have to get a group together.
No,
they're individual rights.
All right,
okay.
I'm with you.
Then it goes on. The same amendment goes on to say, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, if an individual wants to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances, does an individual have the right under the First Amendment to do that?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, even though it says...
read in that context, yes.
Sure. Even though it says, or the right of the people, which some liberals try to say means it's plural, meaning it has to be a bunch.
But it doesn't say group of people.
That says the right of the people.
Of the people.
So let's go to the Second Amendment.
Okay.
The Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state.
Okay.
The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now notice, the Second Amendment does not say individuals have a right to self-protection against criminals. That's not what it says.
Correct.
The Second Amendment is written so it says that the people have a right to protect themselves or to be armed against tyranny.
Tyranny, as a militia.
As a militia.
Right, but if I have a weapon, if I have one at home, and I don't want to be a part of your militia, I just want it to protect myself, does that not leave me out?
No.
Why does it not? I'm not part of the militia. I'm not fighting anything.
It doesn't matter. One is a bigger, it's the way I would describe it as this. If I defined a ball, okay, would a football fall under that definition? Yes. Okay, it's a ball.
It's a ball.
But I'd have to define ball. I couldn't define it as something that is exclusively round.
Okay.
Because a football isn't round.
Correct.
Also, a basketball is round, a baseball is round, but one's big and one is small.
Okay.
So I would have to have the definition of ball large enough to include a bunch of sub-definitions.
Okay.
In that case, if individuals have the right to keep and bear arms as part of a militia, by definition, they have the right to self-protection against a criminal.
Correct.
Okay, and so then it becomes the question of who has the right? Is it the individual or is it the government? And if the Bill of Rights was all passed at the same time, and if in every other case in the Bill of Rights where it refers to the right of the people is considered by everybody to be an individual right, then the right to bear arms is an individual right. But you have to recognize the first part of it is to have a well-regulated militia and it being necessary to the security of a free state.
Okay. Correct. But a well-regulated? How do you get past the term that there has to be some kind of regulation?
Well, when a group of volunteers assemble
as a militia,
okay, they generally elect a leader. At least that's certainly what happened in the War of Independence.
Yes, and many wars after. Yes,
and the wars after. So you had militia all over the place. Some of them were run well, some of them were run poorly. But the point is that the militia was a group of volunteers, and they brought their own arms.
Right.
They didn't run over to some place
then go to an armory
run by the government.
Yeah.
Because let's remember, at the time that the Revolutionary War was fought, the United States was not its own government, or it was in the sense that it had declared its independence.
Right.
But we were rebelling against the authorized government at the time, which was the King in Great Britain. And had we not had the right to keep and bear arms at that time, which we did not as a matter of law, but as a matter of nature, that's just the way it was then. Right. Could we have won that war with pitchforks and broomsticks? No.
All right, let me throw this one at you then. All right, so we agree you have a right to bear arms.
Okay.
Based on what was going on at the time, that the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution was written, we've declared our freedom, but we also declared that the individual states also were sovereign. Mm-hmm. Did we not put some kind of kink in our Second Amendment 150 years ago?
No, because here's what the 9th and 10th Amendment says. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other retained by the people. The 10th Amendment, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. The Second Amendment supersedes, because it's an individual right. But states can't take away those rights.
But what I'm saying is, over the course of the 200 plus years that we've been here, in the last 150, as the federal government has become so much stronger than the state government, did we not give up there? The states couldn't do anything.
We never passed an amendment. We never passed an amendment that would take away the right to keep and bear arms. We never passed that amendment. I'm not questioning whether or not the federal government's become bigger. But let me go on just for a second. Let's go to the 4th Amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. Now, liberals will claim, correctly so, that the 4th Amendment protects individual rights to be secure in their persons, warrants, these types of things.
Right.
In their houses, their papers, and their effects. They cannot be unreasonably searched and seized.
Right.
They say that's an individual right, not a group right. But the term is the right of the people. It doesn't say it's an individual right. It says the right of the people. So the term of art, at that time when it said the right of the people, in the context of looking at the Bill of Rights, you have to believe that if the right of the people means an individual right in one amendment, that the right of the people means an individual right in other amendments.
Okay, I'm good
unless
with that.
It's specifically said otherwise.
Okay.
And so that's the most important thing. Now let me go to one other thing, and that is this, that in the Catholic Church, I'm not Catholic, but in the Catholic Church you have 2 types of sins. You might have more, but I know that you have at least 2.
Okay.
You have, I think they call them venial sins, which are small ones, and you have mortal sins, which are big ones.
Okay.
In government or in ethics, you have first principles and you have second principles.
Okay.
First principles are more important than second principles. Now, the Declaration of Independence, the whole basis for our independence was based on this phrase, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, this gets back to the issue of the ball, the football and the baseball. John Locke wrote Life, Liberty, and Property. Jefferson wanted to expand that right. He assumed that property rights were included as a first principle right.
Yeah.
That people had the right, God-given right, to keep the fruits of their own labor. Now, the Second Amendment is really about a free state. It's not about self-protection. And so it becomes a first principle. And let's remember that when Madison wrote these, he didn't just select the order arbitrarily. The First Amendment protects the right to religion, to practice your religion. It protects freedom of speech. It protects the press. Those are all first principles. The very next amendment is the right to keep and bear arms because it's necessary if you're going to have a free state. And so what I'm trying to get across here is that all of these arguments that are being made now about the Second Amendment gives people the right to bear arms to protect themselves against criminals. No, that's like the football. That is a ball, and people ought to have the right to do that. But the first principle is to have a militia so that the people are protected against tyranny.
Okay. Let me go extend this segment just a little bit. Let me stretch this out on you.
Okay.
And the question then becomes just playing devil's advocate.
Sure.
All right. One of the things that Senator Feinstein and others have told us is that, we understand if you need a shotgun for hunting or a rifle for deer hunting or whatever, but that no individual citizen has any need for a military grade
style.
I say grade, style. This what I consider a ludicrous term, this assault weapon. I mean, if you've ever faced a weapon, it's an assault weapon. If it's a baseball bat or if it's a howitzer, it's an assault weapon. But a military style, large clip, multi-round, easy to switch weapon. You don't need one of those. Based on the
You don't need one of those to do what?
Well, I was going to say, based on the issue of is it for self-protection? Nah, probably not. Based on your theory that it is purely for protection against a tyrannical government, well, yeah, you kind of want to keep up with the folks who are going to come get you.
Well, I'm not. What I'm saying is this: is that what the left is trying to do is say you don't need that for self-protection.
Right.
And I'm not even going to argue whether or not that's true or not, because that's not what the Second Amendment protects. That's not the purpose of this. So I want Dianne Feinstein to argue over about what the Second Amendment says, not what she'd like us to believe it says.
Okay.
She says she's a student of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Well, if she is, then let's talk about what it says, not what she says it says, which is different from what it says.
And there's my question.
Yeah.
That's the question I'm trying to get across. So then it's your belief that if somebody wants to go down to Murfreesboro and get one of the Barrett 50 caliber sniper rifles, should be all right. Would you go that far?
Well,
or am I really kind of pushing you over an edge?
No, because I don't know what a Barrett 50 cal. I don't know that much about guns.
Okay.
Let's say. But we have said that to have a militia, we have said that we're going to outlaw machine guns. Now let's define. Let me define what I think a machine gun is. A machine gun is a gun that you depress the trigger one time and it spits out a whole bunch of bullets.
Okay.
That's
my definition.
That's my definition of a machine gun. Now, a military style weapon that looks like a machine gun, but that you have to pull the trigger every single time you want a bullet to come out, is not a machine gun. And I'm not even sure it is an assault weapon under the definition that most people think it is, because the media tries to make it sound like an assault weapon is a machine gun. And it's not. Well, a gun with a 15-round clip that you have to pull 15 times to make 15 bullets come out is not a machine gun. Well, and I just want them to be honest about it. But even then, let's look at the Second Amendment. And let's ask whether or not a person has the right to have a semi-automatic gun with 15 clips under the Second Amendment. And I believe that the answer is clearly yes. They do have that right. Now, if you want to keep people from going into schools and places like that, that becomes now a safety issue. Do you add more police? Do you Do you change the laws on mental illness and what you do to incarcerate and protect the citizenry or the population against people who are mentally ill? Because every single one of these tragic mass shootings has been committed by somebody, Joe, who's not only mentally ill, but was known to be.
Well, look, let's face it. The situation at Sandy Hook is very simple. In that situation, 41 separate laws were broken. 42 laws on the books is not going to make a difference if you don't enforce the first 41.
Right, and the point I'm trying to make is this. The people on the left who are trying to take guns away from the citizens are not doing it to try to protect us against people who would go in and do what happened at that school. They are trying to do it so that they can take our property. And that's why I say that this is a first principle right. Just as the right to keep the fruits of your own labor is a first principle right. All of them are at the same level. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom to defend yourself against tyranny, freedom for your private property. These are all rights that stand or fall ultimately together. They might not happen, they might not fall all at the same time, but they will fall quickly over time if any of them are taken away.
Dominoes will fall.
Yes.
And they're all in line. All right. We're going to wrap up that section right there. Crom gets the last word. When we come back, if you think guns are bad, well, you hear what's going on in Atlanta. If you're in Atlanta,
you already know.
You already know. Yeah, we'll come back, close out this week's edition of Political Soup. Stay with us.
All Cooper CPAs, located in the heart of East Nashville, offer a wide variety of tax services for individuals and businesses. Contact them at 615-257-0646 and visit their website, allcooper.com, for a full list of services.
Welcome back, everybody. Final segment of Political Soup this week with Crom Carmichael. I'm Joe Williams, just kind of hanging out. Crom, a couple of weeks ago, we talked a little bit about the situation in Atlanta, where suddenly everything was based on testing, and the Atlanta schools for 8 years, 10 years, went through the roof. They were the poster child for the entire country on how you get your test scores up. Unfortunately, it's since been found that the way they do that is by changing answers, changing scores.
Oh, my gosh. The amount of cheating that went on, not by students, but by teachers.
Exactly.
And
administrators.
And administrators. But here's what's fascinating, is that now that the word is out, and by the way, there have been so far 80 educators who've already confessed and will be testifying for prosecutors against a bunch of other people who have not yet confessed.
28 or 29 were indicted by a grand jury.
Okay. I mean, it's a big scandal.
Yes.
But here's what's interesting. This is a person named Randy, and it's R-A-N-D-I, so I assume that's a female.
Sounds feminine.
Randy Weingarten is the chief of the American Federation of Teachers. That's a teachers union. She says, tragically, the Atlanta cheating scandal harmed our children, and it crystallizes the unintended consequences of our test-crazed policies. So the tests made them do it. You know, this is just like a liberal who says it's guns that kill people, not the people who shoot the guns. In this case, it's the tests that drove the teachers to cheat rather than just dishonesty inherent in the system and greed.
Disagree.
Okay.
For a second.
All right.
It's how would you put it, the test-crazed mentality? Is that her term? Okay. There's a difference between blaming the test and blaming the mentality that says you have to meet this test. We'll argue that point, I know, but go ahead.
I don't know if that's a distinction with a difference or without one, but then the next one goes on. Robert Schaefer, and this is the delightful position. He is head of the National Center for Fair and Open Testing. That's his position. He used to be another teacher union person, but here's what he says. When test scores are all that matter, which is not true, by the way, so this is setting up a straw man. There are more things that matter than test scores. But when he tries to set up a straw man, when test scores are all that matter, some educators feel pressured to get the scores they need by hook or by crook. The higher the stakes, the greater the incentive to manipulate to cheat. Well, that's true in anything in life. And so that doesn't excuse the cheaters. He adds, he adds that politicians, now he's blaming the politicians. In addition to the test, now we're going to blame the politicians. Fixation on high-stakes testing is damaging quality and equality. So now it's racist if you want to have test scores be a factor in determining how much money a teacher makes or how much money a district gets. Go ahead.
2 points here, having talked to teachers and having worked in part of that system, and that is this. There is a difference. You're right. Test scores aren't all that matter, but so many times that is all that they're judged on. Good teachers may be great teachers, and they may get all that they can out of the students that they've got. Those students may not be able to reach where the benchmark is. They may do a great job with a kid who falls 2 points short.
Well, the teachers' unions are now rallying around the teachers who are known to have cheated. Now think about that.
I got a problem. No, I got
Okay.
a problem with that. I agree with that.
Well, but that's the point I'm trying to make here, is that teachers' unions are not in the business of trying to figure out how to better educate children. Teachers' unions are in the business of protecting even the worst teachers. And in this case, these are teachers that systematically cheated for years.
Those aren't teachers. Those aren't educators. Those are cheaters. Those are thieves.
But they're there defending them.
I know.
And they will be there to defend them, to help them try to keep from losing their job, even though they're known cheaters. And so the point is that it is a fascinating thing as we watch how big this scandal becomes, to watch how teachers' unions are more interested in trying to protect the cheating teachers. And not all, by the way, not all the teachers in the district cheated.
No.
But they're out there trying to protect the ones that did.
Well, you know what I'd really like to know? I would like to know where that union was 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 6 years ago, when there were teachers who stepped up and said, listen to me. This is what they are cheating, and if I say anything, I'm going to lose my job. They said something, they lost their job. Did the union protect those teachers too? There's my question.
Well, they're not going to protect those, because the unions are there to protect the worst. They're not there to protect the best.
Yeah.
The best don't need protection. The best are going to be well paid, they're going to advance, and they're going to be successful in helping children learn. Unions are there to protect the ones that aren't able to do that. And this is a case in point. Not only do these teachers now we know fail to teach, they also cheated in the process, and there are the unions trying to protect them.
Yeah, like I said, those are the teachers who aren't teachers. They're not educators, they're thieves.
Yeah. But why is the union protecting them?
You know, it's funny. I think we're agreeing on this just from different angles.
It's almost impossible. It is almost, and I use that word, it's almost impossible to defend these people. But the fact that the unions are trying to is indicative of what the unions are for.
I think it opens up the potential for some good discussion on maybe some unintended consequences.
Vouchers, charter schools, this is the way that it's going to eventually go, because you have to have competition to chase out the bad. If you go into a restaurant that serves bad food, do you go again? No. Do some people go? Yes. Do enough people go to keep the restaurant open? No. So that's what you want in school, is you want there to be competition. And by the way, the good teachers will thrive on competition because they will be given even better ways. They will be educated into better ways to teach children. And competition will lift everything. Now, will every single child do better under competition? Not every single child, just like it's impossible to say that any system would eradicate all poverty. But will 95% of the children or 97% of the children benefit by competition? The answer is yes. Whereas now in Atlanta, you got all these kids now who are now, what, 25 years old, who are now finding out.
They can't read.
Yeah.
Can't read, can't do simple math,
Yeah.
can't do a checkbook.
Yeah, so.
Okay. Again, I think we're agreeing on that.
We are. You bet we are.
It's a hard way to get there. I will say this as my closing argument on this subject, and that is this. Again, having worked some as a substitute in some public education situations and knowing many teachers, one of the happiest, boy, that's not the right way to put it, one of the best decisions I think my oldest daughter made was deciding not to go into teaching.
Well, gosh.
I can't, my hat is off to anybody, one, who's doing it, and two, who's planning on going to it, because it is
and doing a good job, though, Joe.
Nearly an impossible job, and they're doing good jobs.
Well,
it's hard.
It
is
I'm
hard.
not going to, there are a lot of jobs that are hard.
Yes.
And a person who becomes a teacher has to be held accountable.
Agreed.
And we really want them to do a good job. And we ought to want to pay teachers who do a good job.
Yes.
But I don't want to pay teachers who don't do a good job. And in fact, the ones who do a poor job, I want to they need to be out of the system. And unions aren't there to protect the good teachers. Unions are there to hold the good teachers back because they don't want the good teachers to show up, the ones that they're really there to protect, which are the bad teachers. So let me say this, I want to be clear. Not all teachers are bad. Only 10 or 15% of teachers at any one time are in the bottom, get this, 10 or 15%.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's true.
That's by definition. Those are the ones who shouldn't be in the system, or at least ought to be eligible to be terminated.
Reminds me of when I first went to work in public service, when two department heads came to me after a month or so and said, "Hey, you need to slow down. You're making us look bad."
Oh, there you go.
That was a fun time. For Crom Carmichael, I'm Joe Williams. Please join us next time on Political Soup. Who knows what we'll be into then? Who knows what? No, I'm not going there.
Well, we don't know.
We don't know.
That's the fun part.
That's the scary part with Crom. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time on Political Soup.